Hello, and thank you for joining the World Bank's Agriculture Finance Support Facility webinar. Today's topic is about introducing the Smallholder Agriculture Finance and Investment Network. Today's speakers join us from the International Fund for Agricultural Development, or IFAD. We welcome Bettina Prato and Dagmari Habate-Salas. Our facilitator is Alberto Milan, Agriculture Specialist with the AgriFin program. I'm Tamara Palmer, and I'm assisting with today's webinar. For those of you who have not participated in one of our webinars, please allow me to provide a quick tour of the space. Participants are on mute. If you need to connect with the facilitator or tech team, please send your question through the chat box feature, which is found on the right side of your WebEx screen. The last 20 minutes of our time together will be a Q&A session with the presenters, and we encourage you to ask questions throughout the webinar. We will collect and share them as time allows. Again, using the chat and Q&A feature, that is where you would put your questions in. The webinar is being recorded, and all materials, including the recording, will be made available on the AgriFin website within 24 hours of today's date. And now a quick introduction of today's speakers. Bettina Prato is the Senior Coordinator of the Secretariat for the Smallholder Agriculture Finance and Investment Network, or SAFIN. A political scientist by training, Bettina has worked in the area of rural development for over 15 years with a focus on international policy processes affecting country-level and regional investments in rural transformation and agri-food SMEs. Prior to taking on the role of Senior Coordinator for SAFIN, she was the Global Engagement Team Leader in the Global Engagement, Strategy, and Knowledge Department at IFAD, with responsibility for participation in a number of forums in the United Nations system and other contexts, including G7, G8, and G20. Dagmari Habate-Salas is the Technical Specialist of the Secretariat of the Smallholder Agriculture Finance and Investment Network. Dagmari has over 7 years of professional experience working in private finance and international development. Most recently, Dagmari was leading IFAD's engagement in the establishment of the Uganda Uganda Fund in Kampala, an equity fund investing in Ugandan agro-SMEs. He also held various positions at the Institute in Rome, South Sudan, and Ethiopia, including as task manager for the RUFI-PII project in Ethiopia, a U.S. $252 million partnership between IFAD, commercial banks, and the government of Ethiopia. The IFAD is an international financial institution and a specialized agency of the United Nations dedicated to eradicating poverty and hunger in rural areas of developing countries. It was established as an international financial institution in 1977 as one of the major outcomes of the 1974 World Food Conference to combat hunger and rural poverty in developing countries, especially low-income, food deficit countries, and to improve the livelihoods of poor rural people on a sustainable basis. Thank you very much for allowing me to welcome you to the space and to finish those introductions of our speakers and their organization. I'm now going to be turning it over to Alberto. Alberto?
Thank you, Tamara. Welcome, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us today for this very timely and relevant webinar. Today, we'll be learning more about SAFIN, the Smallholder Agriculture Finance and Investment Network initiative, incubated by IFAD, as well as their efforts to improve smallholder agriculture finance. On this note, we are glad to inform you that AgriFin just wrapped up its 2017 forum, convened with the World Bank on financing low-carbon resilient agriculture. This was a two-day interactive event that connected key stakeholders in the agriculture finance and climate finance space. The forum explored how financiers in developing countries, especially those working with agricultural clients, can partner with climate finance investors to fund their investments in low-carbon resilient agriculture. This strategic event convened sector leaders to provide them with an opportunity to understand how they may collaborate more effectively. To that end, the data and feedback received clearly shows how programs like AgriFin and new initiatives such as SAFIN are critical for finding solutions to the challenges faced by the agriculture sector to access sufficient and adequate finance. Hence, we are grateful to have Bettina and Dagmari presenting SAFIN today. And without further ado, let's welcome Bettina and Dagmari. Thank you very much for joining us today. The opportunity.
Thank you, everyone. Can you confirm that you can hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, thank you. So this is Bettina Prato. Thank you for the introduction, Tamara. I'm sitting here with my colleague, Dagmawi.
Good morning, everybody.
I want to say at the outset that we really want to thank AgriFin, so the team at the World Bank, for giving us this opportunity for us as we are still in the development phase, or as we say, the incubation phase for this new network. It's really an endless source of learning and excitement to be able to enter into dialogue with a range of actors that are working on these issues, and to try and really build upon the inputs, the questions, the recommendations, the criticism also that we receive in order to shape this into something that will deliver hopefully real value for advancing this agenda. So what I'm going to do in the next 20 minutes or so, depending on how good my colleague Dagmawi here is keeping me on track and trying to avoid me sort of going off and providing you too much detail on any given point in this presentation. What I'm going to do is introduce a little bit the rationale for this initiative. You know, there's many networks out there. I'm sure that you are parts of any number of networks yourselves, or initiators of networks even. Why we are trying to create this initiative, what is the motivation, why at this point in time, give you a little bit of the history of how we got here, and then a sense of who is involved, what are the main areas of work that we are tackling in this initial phase. Where do we want to go or to be, at least in about 3 years down the line, where we're thinking of having our first stock-taking moment. And then get into some more detail about a few areas where we've drilled down a little bit into greater granularity in terms of shaping a possible work plan for the next few years. As I think is customary with these webinars, afterwards you are all really most welcome to get in touch with us if you have additional questions, but also to help us, suggestions to help us think through some of the issues that will come up in the context of this presentation. So you should receive our, particularly my email address, but I'll also make sure to read it out to you at the end of this presentation. So let me get into the presentation itself and start again from the rationale. So the rationale for this initiative for us is really anchored in the 2030 agenda, and what that requires in terms of sort of increase, not just in productivity in the agricultural sector, and particularly when it comes to smallholders, but really a productive transformation of the economic fabric of rural areas, and a transformation that requires more inclusive and sustainable models of development, dovetailing very well with some of the elements of focus of the Addis Ababa Action Agenda, which is of course part of an integral package with the 2030 Agenda itself. So our starting point is that living up to the ambitions of the 2030 Agenda, not just as concerns SDG 2, but also as concerns financial inclusion, the development of small and medium enterprises, more of a partnership-based approach to economic and social development, reducing inequalities, etc. That requires more inclusive and sustainable rural transformation approaches, which in turn require different type of processes around investment towards inclusive and sustainable rural transformation. For us, as you can see at the left-hand side of this image on the screen, the part of that agenda, the agenda of sustainable, inclusive and sustainable rural transformation that we're interested in tackling, has to do in particular with the role that small and medium enterprises play and need to play in that transformation, and to the role that access to finance plays in supporting the investment capacity of these enterprises. Of course, that is not the end of the story. That's not all of it that needs to be in place to bridge the investment gap for these actors, nor is it all that is needed for rural transformation that is inclusive and sustainable. But it's a very important entry point that we have decided to tackle with a particular focus. So vis-a-vis these objectives that need to be achieved, vis-a-vis an understanding of the importance of investment in agri-food and rural SMEs towards inclusive and sustainable rural transformation, what we saw as we began to think about this several months ago, that progress under business as usual is not occurring at the needed pace globally. Of course, there is great variation in different contexts, but globally, certainly we are not on track towards inclusive and sustainable rural transformation, nor towards bridging the investment gap for small and medium enterprises in rural areas and in the agri-food sector. So 5 key areas where there's need for step changes at the systemic level, as we identify them, are on the screen in front of you. They span the areas of prioritization in the agendas of policymakers, but also of providers of development finance, the need for mobilization of greater sources of capital from a greater variety of sources, including non-traditional sources for the sector, the need to really scale up the adoption of inclusive business models and inclusive institutional approaches to work in this area. They need to also step up and be more strategic in how we identify in which areas there's need for innovation and be better at capitalizing on existing innovation through scaling up pathways. And finally, still a need, again, to be more strategic and focused in tackling knowledge gaps. So how do we get to where we are today? As I said, we've been thinking about this as IFAD, but also with a group of interlocutors and partners, including, from what I saw from the attendee list just before I started talking, some of the institutions that are represented on this webinar as well. In particular, after at the Addis conference, we co-organized together with the Italian Ministry of Finance an event gathering the multilateral development banks and a couple of large private sector entities at the Expo in Milan 2015 in October. Expo being dedicated to themes related to food. And we addressed the question of why, as IFADs, we're not doing more and not being more effective in providing financial instruments, but also complementary services like technical assistance and support to financial intermediaries for small and medium enterprises in agri-food value chains. And we committed to taking this forward in a more collaborative manner as MDBs. Afterwards, last year and at the beginning of this year, we had a couple of other moments of internal reflection where we realized that this couldn't be an MDB agenda only, but it was really critical to try and engage with other types of institutions that play potentially, at least potentially complementary roles in the ecosystem for finance, for investment, for agri-food and rural small and medium enterprises. And that's where we brought together what I call a volunteer group for the co-creation of this network. And we met for the first time, most of us, if not all of us, in June this year in Washington, and we have our next meeting for November. You'll see here that we're mentioning the possibility of a formal launch in early 2018. We're still discussing exactly when that may happen. It's possible that it may happen around the Financing for Development Forum at the end of April in New York, to really try again and emphasize that we would like this network to work as a contribution to the realization of the 2030 agenda, with the level of ambition that brings as our horizon for where we want to be at the end of this effort. So concretely, these actors that came together in this volunteer group that I'll give you a little bit more detail about in a moment, have a shared interest in working in these 5 areas that correspond to the 5 areas where there's major ecosystem gaps. Again, I'm generalizing at the global level. The picture may be very different in individual countries. So it's not just an interest in knowledge sharing, but also an interest, particularly I would say, as you see the central pillar, in alignment of concrete investments, using inclusive models, and sort of around that, working on the knowledge agenda, on better linkages between innovation and scaling up, mobilizing new sources of finance, and policy engagement, with a shared commitment to accountability for processes and for results. So where this gets us in terms of where we started vis-a-vis the rationale is that we see the vision for SAFIN as being something that comes in on the left-hand side of the picture. There's many other actors that are working on this. We are trying to position ourselves as one partnership of actors that operate in different parts of the ecosystem for finance and investment for agri-food and rural SMEs, with a commitment to work together to try and accelerate the closing of particularly the financing gap for small and medium enterprises in this sector. The initial co-creation partners, as you can see, include quite a eclectic group. Some of you may recognize the logo of your own institution there. Let me clarify, although this may be clear already, because I'm speaking about an incubation process that is now underway, that as this has not been formally launched, none of these institutions is presented here as a formal member of the network. IFAD itself is not a formal member of the network at the moment. What we have is a group of co-creation partners that regularly come together to discuss both concrete issues that we have a shared interest in, and the progressive fleshing out of a work plan for the network itself. The approach that we're taking to this process of developing SAFIN is that we have been asked by the partners to facilitate the process. This is really not an IFAD-owned initiative. It's co-owned by, let's say, the co-creators. We've also been very open and receptive to institutions and individuals signaling an interest in participating. In fact, even as we are creating this, outreach, also very often by word of mouth, is happening. And one of the really great outcomes of this webinar today for us would be to hear from some of you who may be interested also in joining this adventure, let's say, of putting this together in the next few months. What is important is to really be committed to working together in the 5 areas that I listed just a few minutes ago, and sort of a belief, of course, in the fundamental rationale for this initiative. The approach we're taking, as you saw, we're positioning SAFIN in this slide with the 2030 agenda on the right-hand side. It's very ambitious, and I think we have to hold ourselves accountable for delivering against very high ambitions. However, the approach we're taking is an iterative one, whereas we are also trying to design activities that deliver concrete value to the partners in the near term, that builds and adds value to what we individually do on the ground. And so the way we see this rolling out in the next 13 years or so is that we will take stock in 2020, 2025 of where we are, and progressively adjust also the level of ambition and the scale of the activities that we undertake to make sure that we don't end up just being sort of a niche project. But at the same time, we are also not over-ambitious and overly vague also in what we try to achieve or wanting to be all over the place. We're not aiming to set up a new institution. Again, it's a network that we're talking about. And what we're envisioning is that there will be just a small secretariat servicing this and keeping this together, which may be in IFAD, but the decision will lie with the partners. In terms of work streams, we have worked with the 5 areas of interest as a guide or as a framework for the 5 work streams that we're interested in undertaking, with a variable geometry, with different partners being more involved in some and less in others, and different partners leading on individual activities. Here you see some of the proposals that we've been fleshing out. For example, on the policy environment side, we are looking into opportunities to feed into the preparatory process for the FFD forum in April. But we've also begun to take advantage of regional fora taking place. For example, just recently the African Green Revolution Forum in Abidjan, where my colleague Dagmawi was present, to convene some like-minded actors to discuss ways to really advance the conversation and collaborative practice around the issues on the agenda of those participants are in the process of rolling out new vehicles, new facilities. There's a lot of activity going on in terms of blended finance instruments, tools, new funds, etc. So this is an area where we're actively looking into how we're going to be able to bring to test innovative solutions, but also to pool learning where there's need for really bold, innovative, out of comfort zone approaches to the issues that we're facing. We also have a range of activities planned as concerns advancing the knowledge base. Here we absolutely do not want to take on the role of AgriFin, among others, at all. In fact, here we are sort of taking advantage of that space What we're interested in is seeing whether the various knowledge building activities that are going on among different kinds of communities, the research community, in academia, among practitioners, development finance institutions, etc., is it really tackling in a coherent way the issues that we need to tackle in order to achieve the 2030 agenda? And if not, what could we do as a network to try and bring more focus, encourage more focus in that regard? And a few other issues there. I'm not going to read through those that are of the normal kind of activities that a new network would undertake. Here I come to what I think is really at the core of the interest of the initial partners. That's really the possibility of leveraging the network to draw more resources, more financial resources, but not only financial resources, also sort of complementary services towards small and medium enterprises in agri-food systems, farmers, organizations, cooperatives, associations of agro-processors, and so forth. And at the same time, to practically ground our respective investments into collaborative frameworks so that we can really build on each other's strengths. So here you see some of the things that we're doing or thinking of doing in this area, and we'd be happy to come back to those with more details if questions are raised. So here you have an initial sort of taste, if you will, of what we may end up putting in a result framework once we have formally agreed work plan for the network, which we're hoping to have by the end of this year, in the 5 areas that we have selected for action. Very important for us is the first bullet point here, which is that we can have a documented increase in focus in selected policy fora on these issues, and at the same time coming to the second row here, that we have tools in place like the prospectuses that really help us work better together, work together in a more strategic way, and crowd in other investors. This should lead to a documented growth in the number and in the volume of investments that result from the aligned efforts of this group. Now, as I said, the group met almost entirely in Washington in June, and since then, here as Secretariat team in IFAD, we've been working particularly on trying to put more meat on on tools that we could use to advance this agenda in the next 3 years. This is working on a framework for country-level investment prospectuses, the scoping of the research landscape that speaks to what I just mentioned, and then developing tools that enable us to map both ourselves and progress in the ecosystem to navigate the challenges of coordination and alignment. So I'll get to each one of those 3 in turn, and then I close. So as concerns the sectoral investment prospectuses, now what we're trying to achieve here is to have a framework, a document, something that can be put on paper and around which we can organize dialogue platforms that can help both crowd in and better align different investment flows and complementary services. What we have been looking at is what is happening in some other sectors, particularly energy and infrastructure, in part under the umbrella of efforts to implement the 2030 agenda, which is to bring together, if you will, sort of move one step down from country-level strategies and sometimes related investment plans which are very, very important, and they are the legitimate bedrock for this for the activities that we want to take forward as well. But to bridge a little bit the gap between those and the very granular work that individual consulting firms or funds do around developing pipelines of potential projects, potential bankable projects for themselves. What we would like to do is to develop a framework that we as a network, but also others, can use to see where are the priorities in terms of the country plans, where are the areas where we can mobilize and work around opportunities for investment that also involves more private investment, including in particular in domestic private investment, I should say, and real economy investment as well as financial. And overlay this with mapping of existing sources and types of finance and demand and absorptive capacity on the part of SMEs and their financial intermediaries. So that we have a map at the country level in an initial small set of countries we envision that we can use as a basis for rolling out complementary investment activities on the part of the network. So where we are there is that we have conducted a scoping study, which we will be discussing with the network in early October, on the 4th of October. We will then have to validate it, prioritize some countries to roll it out, and of course that will need to be grounded in a demand-led process that is really solidly nested in legitimate country strategies and processes around the 2030 agenda. Then the second area where we've invested quite a bit of time and effort, we're, as in the previous one, it would be really useful for us to have your thoughts, suggestions, and reactions, is the research and knowledge production landscape vis-a-vis issues that relate to agri-food SMEs, rural SME access to finance and productive use of finance for investment. Here, again, as I said before, what we've been trying to see is whether there is a strategic knowledge agenda. Is it written anywhere? Is that providing an umbrella for the individual efforts of individual, academics, practitioners, institutions, etc.? Are the conversations, the questions that are being posed, the kind of fieldwork that is underway all over the world to feed into research projects, is that posing the types of questions that are going to enable us to really accelerate progress on bridging the investment gap towards inclusive and sustainable rural transformation processes? And if that is not the case, what can SAFIN as a multi-stakeholder partnership do to help address that? So as is true for the investment prospectuses, we've been scoping the landscape, identifying some key themes, topics being addressed, identify a few features of how the different communities are working with each other and talking to each other or not, and then considering how SAFIN may position itself as the catalyst of more dialogue as well as more of a strategic focus in among these different communities. In the process, we've also come up with a couple of issues where we feel as a community within the network, within this nascent network, that there are really critical issues, strategic issues to be posed. One is unpacking the question of demand for finance and complementary services by agri-food SMEs. There's a lot of confusion, we feel sometimes, in estimates and assessments between assessing needs, projections, how much finance will be needed to achieve X objective, and the actual demand on the side of SMEs. It's not at all clear that we have adequate tools to understand, unpack, and respond to that, either at the country level or globally. And secondly, the area of blended finance for agriculture. Again, if you have questions on this issue, I would really appreciate those and invite Dagmawi here to come in on that, as he was actively mobilizing and channeling also the discussion on these issues that this event at the African Green Revolution Forum just over 10 days ago or so. And finally, we've been working a little bit on tools, both to track where we are as partners and how we can work together, and sort of tracking progress in the global ecosystem for and in country level ecosystems for agri-food, SME finance, and investment. So we've been running a survey, and we've been also taking forward some dialogue with other initiatives about how we could potentially develop mapping tools that will be available as public goods for governments and other actors to better understand the landscape in individual countries when it comes not just to finance provision, but also, as I said, the demand side of agri-food SME finance and investment. So this brings me to the last slide before the thank you. And those are some of the questions building on what I just presented, where we would be really thrilled to hear from you. One is, the question that invites critical feedback, if you will. As I said from the beginning, we are really excited to hear critical reactions also to the work that we're trying to do here. And that's, do we have the right mix of people, of institutions involved to start with? One of the findings we came up with after doing our internal survey was that we seem to be a little bit more focused on the supply side of the ecosystem rather than on the demand side. And so, we're absolutely keen to redress that. But there's for sure many others that have an important role in terms of impact on the ecosystems that we want to affect. And we will be really keen to hear your suggestions, particularly to try and make this, as I said, as demand-driven an initiative as possible. For the time being, it comes from demand on the part of the co-creators, and the reactions we've had to it, starting from the conference we hosted in January, has been very positive. But it's easy to sit in the comfort of hearing positive feedback. The reality of proving yourself to be demand-driven is a different story. I think it's hard work. So appreciate feedback on that. Then we've been also struggling with this possibility of trying to encourage more of a strategic focus in the knowledge efforts of different communities, and we will be interested in hearing your feedback on that, because the views we've heard are quite diverse. Many actually think it's better for everyone to follow their own agendas, as the incentive systems are different, and eventually they will add up. The questions are not necessarily all the same anyway, so still, for the time being, we still feel differently, but we would really appreciate your thoughts on that and also on how we could add value. We would also be quite interested in hearing, does our sort of initial finding that the real important conversations and research to be taken forward on demand and on blended finance from a range of angles, does that resonate with you? Based on your experience, if you were to say the critical knowledge gaps, the areas where we really need to sort of break new ground are others, please do point those out. We would really appreciate that a lot. And finally, perhaps this is a more tricky one, what's your reaction to this idea of taking forward country-level investment prospectuses? Is that confusing? Does this make not a lot of sense? Does it sound as it could replicate things that are already on the ground, where is the value added, etc.? We'd be really interested in your reactions and also in your suggestions for taking those forward. And I would end here, since I think I've reached exactly the time that I was supposed to reach. So over to the host.
Thank you, Bettina. Yes, perfect timing. Alberto will be working with you to lead the Q&A section. Just make sure that Alberto is online with good sound. Yeah, good.
Yeah, thank you, Tamara. Thank you very much, Bettina, for such a comprehensive presentation of SAFIN. We have been receiving a lot of questions from the audience, and then it seems that perhaps we could get some more clarity on exactly what SAFIN will be doing, as many of the questions that have been posed seem to perceive SAFIN as a new fund. So perhaps in a nutshell, if you could just briefly in 3 lines explain what are the key issues of SAFIN and what is the comparative advantage, so we can start framing the conversation and the Q&A session following forward.
Okay, thank you, Alberto. That's very important feedback because it means that I was not clear in my presentation, and I take that on board. But let me say, first of all, very easy answer: it's not a fund. It's not a fund; it's a network. What it aims to do is to serve as a platform that can encourage its members to work together collaboratively in the 5 areas that we've identified based on their own work programs, in a way that we, through the Secretariat at the Center, we retain learning and we keep track, we map over time what is going on in terms of this concrete collaboration on the ground, where we also as a central Secretariat provide some tools like the country-level investment prospectuses, for example, like how-to knowledge notes that relate to using of blended finance instruments, understanding demand, etc., that the different components of the network, the different partners can use to practically better align their work with each other and to benefit from the collective learning that will feed into those knowledge tools. Is that clear?
Yeah, I think that is much clearer. Thank you so much for clarifying. It's just that based on the questions that the audience is posing, it seems that for some of them it wasn't very clear whether it was actually a fund with finance capacity or it was more of a knowledge platform network that could be moving the agri-finance agenda forward. Some of the questions that we are actually receiving are really interesting, and for instance, one of our colleagues is interested to know, in terms of knowledge, you will be sharing promising practices on new generation of agricultural insurance and risk management. How will you be addressing those, and will that information be shared? Also, on that note, people are really interested to know more about how to finance SMEs. Will you be addressing issues such as movable collaterals, guarantee mechanisms, movable asset products, and enforcement of securities?
Okay, so Alberto, yes. You know, you sort of summed up what I said earlier as sort of the network is going to be more on the knowledge sharing side rather than funding, and I think that is correct. Even though sort of we may end up needing some sort of seed funding capacity to support some of the collaborative activities on the ground. I do want to emphasize that what I think is different in SAFIN compared to AgriFin itself is that we are interested. The bottom line for us is really alignment around investment activities in specific contexts. So the knowledge feeds into that. So when it comes to addressing this sort of sharing practices on agricultural insurance and risk management, by the way, risk issues are absolutely sky high in the agenda of the network, because they are so important in terms of unlocking more and more diverse sources of finance. Agricultural insurance is one type of solution to specific risks. So at the moment, I'm not in a position to say that is going to be a theme that we will for sure address, or sort of some of the other specific issues related to instruments or funds and for channeling finance to small and medium enterprises. The idea is that we have through the opportunities for collaboration a ground for implementing the lessons from these how-to sort of knowledge production efforts that we are not going to undertake directly as a network. Now, individuals within the network do actually do this. Some of the IFADs that are part of it, some also of the bilateral development cooperation entities, and absolutely what we want to do is capitalize on that knowledge, bring it together, but with the purpose of channeling it to feed into actual investment activities on the ground. So I'm sorry to come back to AgriFin all the time, but we would not be seeking to replace what you guys are doing in terms of facilitating also share or CABFIN, for example. Some of the other initiatives that are more directly focused on pooling learning and making learning available, whether it's through webinars, whether it's through specific capacity building activities, etc. To the contrary, we would be looking to drive more traffic to you or to CAPFIN or to other platforms, and I'm coming back to this because risk management is an issue that and tools to address different kinds of risks for different actors are really key here. If we realize that a specific set of issues are not being addressed in terms of producing knowledge tools, producing learning, rigorous learning tools and products around those, then it's not an exercise of sharing, it's an exercise of catalyzing, facilitating, perhaps financing research activities by those that are in a position to do that. And that goes back to my slides on research agenda setting. So we would be working on those issues from that angle.
Excellent. Thank you very much for clarifying, Bettina. That is really useful. One of the questions that most of our colleagues are actually asking is, what is the criteria for SAFIN membership? How can you actually benefit as a country or as an institution from the SAFIN network? Is there any specific eligibility criteria?
Thank you for the question. It's a question I particularly welcome because as I said sort of in passing, we've taken a very open approach to this, and you know, I think that this is the approach that we will continue to have even after the network is formally launched. What is important for joining is having a shared commitment to, you know, what we want to achieve, and to work in the 5 areas that I listed. There is a statement of intent that we have, and you know, I'm happy to share it with you know, whoever is interested. But it's you know, it's a very open process, you know, insofar as also there's no fees attached to this, you know, at least for the time being. It's a network. So if you're working in the space, you have something to contribute, you're willing to actively contribute to the work streams, you should do that. You know, you should be able to do that. You should feel absolutely welcome to signal that. Now, you mentioned countries. At the moment, we are not thinking of countries as members. If by country means sort of a government, but you know, I would need to think about what that could look like. What I can say is that you know, there are a couple of bilateral development cooperation agencies that are part of government, that are part of this initial group, and it would make absolute sense for relevant institutions, you know, also in developing countries, to be part of it. So it's not the country itself, but it is, you know, the institutions that are working on these issues in different countries, irrespective of where you're sitting in terms of development finance, traditional, okay, development finance lines. You should absolutely feel that this is your thing.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much for clarifying. One of the other questions that our colleagues are actually asking is, what is the level of involvement of different governments or different institutions in this project when it comes to enabling environment? Have they expressed their commitment or their interest, or how are you dealing with this?
You know, what a very tricky question. Who asked that? You know, that person just put me on the spot. So when it comes to policy engagement, at the moment, we are primarily working at the global level, and as I said, so because no governments as such are involved in the process, with the exception of some institutions that are particularly closely associated with their respective governments, because they're government entities. Like, and I forgot to mention, sorry, Land Bank, South Africa, earlier as one example of that. Then the commitment is primarily on the part of the IFADs and the UN agencies, and you know, the networks of agricultural credit associations, etc., to engage in the policy spaces where we are able to engage, taking forward the narrative that we that's, you know, sort of the umbrella narrative of SAFIN, taking forward the message that we agree to, etc. So, you know, I'm not sure whether I understand the question correctly, but you know, we would wish to engage with government interlocutors on policy dialogue on those issues. This is not coming to us as a request on the part of specific governments. Let me put it this way.
Okay, I think that is clear enough. Thank you, Bettina. One other question that our audience is interested in is, will SAFIN have any particular emphasis on regional coverage or in-country coverage, or will it just be a network that acts globally and then shares knowledge among stakeholders, regardless of what country and what region you operate in?
So, if we just go global as a global network, we will not do very much. So, we thought about that, and ultimately, again, I think we are a group of pretty pragmatic institutions that are interested in making a greater, more positive difference on the ground than we do right now. So the practical anchoring of any learning, any policy messages, any engagement at any knowledge sharing at the global level that we do will need to be regional and initially anchored particularly in a few countries where we will prioritize the work on investment perspectives in particular. I think that it's really important that we are working on the engagement of the various regional development banks. At the moment, we have Inter-American Development Bank, African Development Bank involved. We are in dialogue with the Asian Development Bank also to see whether they would also like to be on board. And we have participants in different regions that will for sure primarily work on the agendas of their specific regions. Going forward, it would be great if we could end up having different regional chapters that are the most active when it comes to concrete collaborations on the ground, whereas the global part of the network remains more of a repository of knowledge and policy engagement one.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. There is another interesting question that just came through, which is two questions actually. One of them is we have colleagues in the audience today that are actually working on structured finance. They are putting together a couple of agro-investment funds for Africa. Is this something that, in order to get knowledge on how to structure it, could they get access to, or could they reach out to SAFIN to find more information, and if so, at what stage?
Alberto, thank you for this question. Thank you. Dagmar is going to take it.
Thank you, Alberto. So the big asset of the SAFIN is, as Bettina mentioned earlier, is the partners that we have around the table. So
Dagmar,
yeah?
could you speak a little bit more closely to the speaker of your microphone so we can hear you better? Thank you.
Do you hear me better now?
Yes, excellent.
Okay, thank you very much. So what I was mentioning is that the big asset of the SAFIN is the people, the institutions that we have around the table. So if colleagues or partners are building these type of investment structures, SAFIN is a perfect platform for you to bring it to our network, for us to give you input, ideas, and also, at a pre-competitive stage, give you input on how it could be structured better and learn from what our partners have done before, and learn from our mistakes and our successes as well. So at any time, I think it will be good for the colleague to bring it to the SAFIN, and we can help him really answer some of the key questions that he has in structuring through our partnership.
Okay, excellent. It's great to hear that actually. So now, on that note, we'd like to ask you the final question actually, which is, both of you have raised the issue of blended finance, which is very relevant today, but one of our colleagues in the audience believes that blended finance is basically deployed to those that already have access to conventional loan finance, whether concessional or market rate finance. Will you have any focus on savings and credit groups for that large percentage of smallholder farmers that actually don't have access to finance yet?
Thank you, Alberto. Again, so that is a very good fact that most of the blended finance that's coming into the ag sector is going to the bigger institutions. And one of the major issues is only 3% really of blended finance is going to the ag sector. So with the limited amount of capital coming in, that's where you see where most of it is centered around the bigger players. But I think there's a big interest in blended finance now, more and more, especially in the agriculture sector. There's different funds that are coming up. They're looking to really capitalize on the work of these cooperatives and savings groups. As you know, it does cost a lot more. There's a lot of issues with serving those institutions, but I think there's more interest, and I think in the next months or so you'll see hopefully months, but soon you'll see different instruments coming in or different investment structures coming in to help address that. And that's one of the things that we try to answer. We co-finance a study with the African Development Bank and as other institutions to see how blended finance, what is the typical toolkits that we can develop for blended finance to work for all along the agricultural value chain. So we're more than welcome to share thoughts with the colleague that answered that question as well. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. It's great actually to hear that, Dagmar, especially given the great focus and emphasis from different financiers and donors on blended finance. So it's good to know that you will be addressing both sides of the spectrum. We'd like to thank you both for joining us today and not only presenting but also addressing the questions from the audience. It's been very wonderful insights for us to learn more about SAFIN and the work that you will be doing in the years to come. And I will pass now the floor to Tamara that will wrap up.
Yes, thank you, Alberto. Thank you to all participants for joining our webinar today, and a big thank you to Bettina and Dagmar for presenting. And we just wanted to reemphasize that the webinar recording and the presentation materials will be available on the AgriFin website within 24 hours of today's webinar. So please check the website for information about this and other upcoming AgriFin webinars. We also invite you to join the conversation by joining our Agriculture Finance group on LinkedIn. Again, that's the Agriculture Finance group. And then just so that everyone knows, they can contact Bettina Prado directly to continue this conversation with her and IFAD at b.prato@ifad.org, and I will give that to you phonetically, and I will type it into the chat box one last time. That's B as in Bravo, dot Papa, Romeo, Alpha, Tango, Oscar, at Indigo, Foxtrot, Alpha, Delta, dot Oscar, Romeo, Golf, b.prato@ifad.org. Finally, AgriFin and the World Bank just concluded our 2017 Forum on Financing Low-Carbon Resilient Agriculture. Materials from that event will be available on the website soon. In the meantime, we encourage you to visit the new website. You can check out the forum's agenda and the list of speakers, and that location is where the presentations and other associational materials will also be kept. Thank you again to everyone, and we look forward to hearing you back here, having you back here in our webinar space soon.
Thank you.